The moment I sat down at the Thanksgiving table, I already felt the familiar weight of being invisible. My mother, smiling brightly, raised her glass and said, "Your sister's wedding was just perfect. When are we getting an invitation to yours?" The words landed like a hammer, sharp and cold, cutting through the warmth of the gathering. I forced a smile, but inside, a familiar sting gnawed at me. It wasn't just the question, it was the assumption that my life somehow didn't measure up, that my accomplishments were invisible compared to hers. I remembered every birthday she ignored, every achievement dismissed with a casual "that's nice, dear," and every holiday where she somehow made it about someone else. My mind flashed back to the graduation where I stood in the corner, applauded politely, while my sister basked in adoration. Even now, I felt the old familiar ache of being overlooked, the quiet, simmering resentment that had never left me. My sister chatted loudly, oblivious, while I chewed my food slowly, each bite tasting like all the years I'd been underestimated. The warmth of the room felt suffocating, layered with settled judgments, and I realized I was no longer willing to be a ghost in my own family. Growing up, I learned early that love in my family wasn't measured equally. My sister seemed to float through life on a current of constant attention and praise, while I quietly gathered accomplishments that went unnoticed. I remember my 10th birthday, a small cake I'd been excited about, overshadowed by a surprise party for her friend in the next room. My achievements at school, whether winning an art contest or getting the lead in the school play, were met with polite nods, nothing more. Meanwhile, every trophy, certificate, or compliment from my sister was celebrated as if it were a family triumph. I recall sitting at countless dinners, watching her charm relatives effortlessly, while I smiled politely, feeling the hollow echo of indifference. The pattern became a rhythm in my life, expectation of invisibility, the quiet acceptance that my feelings were secondary. As I sat at this Thanksgiving table, the memories resurfaced in vivid detail, and I could feel the years of small neglect coalesce into a sharp awareness. Viewers, I know, can relate to that quiet ache of being unseen, the subtle sting of favoritism, and the way it shapes your sense of self. It's a familiar, lingering hurt that clings long after the moment passes. As dinner progressed, I let my eyes drift round the table, quietly observing every exchange, every smile, every subtle jab. My mother kept showering my sister with attention, praising her choices, her career, her new life, while I nursed a plate of turkey and forced polite nods. I noticed how my cousins leaned in when she spoke, hanging on every word, while my own contributions barely registered. That familiar twinge of FOMO crept in, the fear of being forgotten, overlooked, invisible land. I felt it sharpen into something colder, more determined. I caught myself calculating. Each laugh, each shared memory, each sly remark revealed the hierarchy I'd always been forced to accept. But for the first time, I realized I didn't have to stay in the shadows. My mind spun quietly, imagining the small ways I could shift perceptions, reclaim control, assert the recognition I had been denied for so long. Even as I smiled at a distant relative's joke, inside I plotted subtle maneuvers, thinking of the conversations I could stir, the hints I could drop, and the truths they didn't know I held close. Something had shifted. I wasn't just frustrated anymore. I was ready. My sister's voice carried across the table like it always did, full of pride and just enough self-satisfaction to make everyone else feel small. She rattled off details of her wedding, the designer dress she'd worn, the 5-tiered cake that cost more than my first car, the venue with chandeliers that sparkled brighter than any attention I'd ever received. She mentioned the gifts she'd gotten, the accolades from distant relatives, and even a few magazine features that had plastered her face in glowing articles. Everyone nodded and murmured their admiration, while I felt the old familiar ache of being overlooked. I thought of the months I had spent planning my own wedding quietly, the thoughtfulness behind every detail that no one noticed, the sacrifices I had made that went unappreciated. Yet, I didn't interrupt or compete. I remained calm, letting her words hang in the air while I analyzed each reaction round the table. My mother's approving smiles, My cousins murmured, oh, wow. They all confirmed the imbalance I had endured my whole life. But in that moment, there was an internal shift. I realized that my calm, unassuming presence was deceptive. They underestimated me, and underestimating me was about to become their first mistake. I decided it was time to let them see, just enough to pique their curiosity, without revealing everything. As my sister continued to bask in her own glory, I casually mentioned a few details from my wedding that had gone unnoticed: the hand-picked vintage decorations, the charity donations in lieu of favors, the intimate surprises for my closest friends. I let slip about a small, private performance by a musician no one had ever heard of, someone I had arranged personally, and watched as a flicker of recognition crossed their faces. My mother raised an eyebrow, a subtle shift that felt monumental, and even my sister paused mid-laugh, curiosity creeping into her expression. The room's energy shifted, just slightly, but enough to make me smile inwardly. They didn't know what I'd done, the care and thought behind my efforts that had gone uncelebrated. For the first time that evening, I felt the thrill of being acknowledged, even in the smallest way. It was a quiet victory, but it set the stage. The power balance was beginning to tilt, and I could feel their underestimation turning into subtle tension. I thought my subtle hints had done their job, but my mother laughed lightly and said, "Oh, you always exaggerate, dear. It was probably nice, but not nearly as exciting as your sister's wedding." My sister smirked and added, "Yeah, you always make things sound fancier than they really are. I mean, it was sweet, but come on." The words hit like ice. Years of being dismissed, minimized, and made to feel insignificant rose to the surface. I felt my hands tighten round my fork, my chest growing tight with frustration, but I forced a polite laugh. I could see the smug satisfaction in their eyes, the unspoken message that I would never measure up, that my efforts would always be invisible. My mind replayed countless other moments, the science fair my project won, ignored, the recital I practiced for, barely acknowledged, the late nights spent planning events no one noticed. Now, the same pattern repeated, right in front of me. Their casual gaslighting wasn't just irritating, it was a reminder of a lifetime of emotional neglect. I clenched my jaw silently, letting the words wash over me, knowing that this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. Something deeper had awakened, a quiet, simmering need to reclaim my presence and prove my worth, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing my anger sitting there. I realized I had a choice: continue to shrink, continue to fade into the background as I always had, or take control and make them see me not just quietly, but unmistakably. My mind raced, sketching out small victories, subtle reveals, and the perfect moment for impact. I imagined the looks on their faces when they realized all the careful and noticed work I had done, the thought and planning they had ignored for years. In my mind, I staged the scene over and over, each iteration sweeter than the last, a gentle reveal at a family gathering, hints that escalated into undeniable proof, their gasps echoing in the room as they finally acknowledged me. I smiled quietly to myself, imagining the satisfaction, the justice of finally being recognized, not revenge and anger, but in brilliance, showing them that underestimation had been their first mistake. This wasn't about cruelty, it was about balance, about turning years of neglect into a quiet, satisfying triumph. I felt my pulse quicken as the plan crystallized, a mix of anticipation and exhilaration fueling me. Finally, I would no longer be invisible. Over the next few days, I started dropping hints, carefully and deliberately, letting my presence and accomplishments seep into conversations without appearing boastful. At casual dinners, I mentioned the little-known charitable donations my wedding had inspired. On social media, I shared a few elegant photos, tasteful, understated, but enough to make anyone paying attention pause. I leaned on mutual friends who had attended my wedding, letting their compliments slip naturally into casual chatter around the family. Each small action felt like a carefully placed chess piece. The reactions were subtle at first, raised eyebrows, quick glances, hesitant murmurs, but enough to tell me that my plan was working. My mother still smiled, still tried to brush it off, but I could see the shift in her posture, the slight tension she couldn't hide. My sister laughed at a story I told about my wedding, but there was a flicker of unease behind her eyes, as if she was realizing she had underestimated me. I remained calm, letting them continue underestimating me, knowing that when the truth fully revealed itself, the reversal would be complete. They thought I was quiet, that I had nothing to show, but that perception was about to become their biggest mistake. The day finally arrived. A casual family brunch had been scheduled, the kind that usually passed without incident, filled with polite chatter and obligatory smiles. But I had other plans. As everyone gathered around the table, I began to speak, calmly, almost conversationally, weaving in stories from my wedding that no one had paid attention to before, the intimate moments I had crafted, the private performances that had moved guests to tears, the charity initiatives that had quietly impacted dozens of people. I saw the first flicker of surprise cross my mother's face, the subtle pause in my sister's laughter, as they processed the depth and care behind what they had always dismissed. Then, I dropped the final detail, the twist that would linger. In their minds, a renowned photographer who had attended my wedding had just featured my event in a national magazine, showcasing the elegance, creativity, and impact that no one had recognized before. Gasps filled the room, and murmurs of disbelief rippled through the family. My sister's mouth fell open, her confidence faltering as she tried to regain control. But the momentum had shifted irreversibly. My mother's hand trembled slightly on her coffee cup, a silent acknowledgement of the oversight, of the years spent ignoring my achievements. The room's energy changed. What had once been casual conversation now carried the weight of revelation. I felt a quiet thrill. The satisfaction of justice tempered with grace. I wasn't just being acknowledged. I was being recognized for the person I truly was. Finally, the emotional payoff was instantaneous, as if years of being invisible had been compressed into this single moment, and I could see the recognition dawn in their eyes. The reversal was complete. They had underestimated me, dismissed me, and now they had to reckon with the truth. My triumph was subtle but undeniable, leaving a lingering sense of karmic satisfaction that I could savor silently while maintaining the calm composure I had cultivated. It wasn't cruelty, it was rightful acknowledgement, the kind I had longed for all my life. My sister's composure cracked first. Her usual confident smile faltered, replaced by a tight-lipped stare as she tried to grasp the magnitude of what I'd just revealed. "Wait, you're saying all of this was your doing?" she asked, her voice rising slightly, tinged with disbelief. I nodded slowly, letting each word land, each pause stretch long enough for the weight to sink in. Yes, every detail, every moment, everything you thought was luck or fancy planning. That was me. The room went quiet, relatives shifting uneasily, sensing the shift in dynamics. My mother opened her mouth to interject, but I held her gaze, refusing to let her diminish the moment as she often had. "I can't believe we didn't notice," my sister muttered, voice trembling now, frustration and embarrassment coiling in every syllable. "We always thought you were just quiet, unambitious. But this is incredible." I kept my tone steady, calm, letting her process the reality she had ignored for years. It was subtle but complete. The arrogance she had worn like armor was gone, replaced by an reluctant acknowledgement of my capability. The family's murmurs of admiration, the flickers of surprise, and even the small, grudging smiles of my cousins made it clear the power had shifted. For the first time, I was not just seen. I was respected. My sister, humbled, could only sit back as I carried the room's attention, proving that underestimation had been her greatest mistake. The tension that had always defined our relationship had transformed into a balance of acknowledgement and quiet triumph, and in that charged, emotional space, I finally felt the validation I had long deserved. After the initial shock faded, my mother's expression softened, and I could see the weight of realization settling over her. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then finally said, I didn't realize how much I overlooked you all these years. I thought I was being fair. But clearly, I failed." Her voice trembled slightly, an uncharacteristic vulnerability that left the room silent. I felt a rush of complex emotions: relief, vindication, and a subtle sense of sorrow for the years lost to favoritism. I chose not to gloat or punish. Instead, I listened, letting her words hang in the air. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about recognition, about giving her the space to confront her own mistakes, while I maintained the dignity she had often denied me. She looked at my sister, then back at me, finally acknowledging that her actions had consequences, that favoritism left wounds deeper than she realized. The family seemed to breathe differently now. The previous tension replaced with a quiet respect for the balance finally restored. I held the moral high ground, calm yet undeniable, while she faced the subtle karmic justice of seeing the child she underestimated rise to her rightful place. In that moment, I felt the satisfaction of closure, not revenge, but the kind of justice that resonates quietly, powerfully, and emotionally with everyone present. As the evening wound down, I found a quiet moment to reflect on everything that had happened. The air at the table felt lighter, yet charged with a new awareness. My family's dynamics had shifted. Subtly but irrevocably, I felt a sense of empowerment I had never known, the kind that comes not from anger, but from finally claiming your worth. My mind replayed the earlier moments, my sister's stunned expressions, my mother's reluctant acknowledgement, the small smiles of cousins who had always overlooked me. Each memory reinforced the lesson I had learned: patience, strategy, and self-belief could turn years of neglect into quiet triumph. There was a bittersweet edge, too, a recognition of time lost and opportunities missed because of their favoritism and my silence. But even that sadness was tempered by satisfaction. I had proven my value without stooping to cruelty, and the karmic balance had been restored. Sitting there, I realized that being underestimated had been a gift in disguise. It had allowed me to plan carefully, act deliberately, and reveal myself in a way that no one could ignore. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, not just for my accomplishments, but for the person I had grown to become. By the time dessert was served, the tension that had dominated the room earlier had softened into a quiet understanding. My mother spoke less, choosing her words carefully, and my sister no longer carried the haughty certainty she always had. I watched my family interact differently, their glances carrying a subtle acknowledgement of my presence, of my worth. As I sat there, I felt a deep sense of growth settle over me, the accumulation of years of resilience, patience, and careful strategy. I reflected on all the moments I had felt invisible, the birthdays, the achievements, the countless times I had been overlooked. None of that pain was erased, but it had been transformed into something powerful: clarity, confidence, and the satisfaction of finally being seen. I realized that my value was not measured by their recognition, but by the grace and intelligence with which I claimed it. Even as the room carried on with polite chatter and laughter, I felt a quiet triumph that didn't need to be loud or dramatic. There was healing in knowing I had taken control of my narrative, asserting my worth without malice, and leaving space for reflection in others. The lingering emotional resonance, the subtle nods, the soft smiles, the shift in energy spoke louder than any words. I had found closure, not by destroying them, but by revealing the truth with dignity, leaving both myself and my family to reckon with what had always been there but ignored. That night, Thanksgiving carried a new meaning, a testament to patience, resilience, and the quiet power of finally being recognized. Weeks later, life had subtly shifted in ways that felt both natural and deeply satisfying. My social circle began to notice my achievements more genuinely. Friends and colleagues praising the creativity and thoughtfulness I had poured into my wedding and personal projects. Invitations to events arrived with a newfound respect, and conversations no longer brushed past me as if I were invisible. Even my family's attitude carried a quiet acknowledgement I didn't need to boast. They simply could no longer ignore what I had accomplished. There were small, symbolic victories too. A handwritten note from a distant cousin expressing admiration. A colleague asking for advice on planning a meaningful event. Subtle gestures that confirmed I had finally claimed my place. It wasn't explosive or public revenge, it was the steady, undeniable proof that I had outgrown the shadow of favoritism and neglect. Sitting in the quiet of my home one evening, I reflected on the journey, savoring the blend of empowerment, validation, and quiet justice. Everything I had endured, every overlooked effort, had led to this balanced, gratifying outcome. In the end, the story wasn't about defeating anyone with malice, it was about rising with dignity, finally being seen, and leaving the lingering impression of triumph that satisfied both heart and mind.